welcome to this 4th edition of the Paris Conference that will be, for the first time ever, digital. Thank you to our presenting partner for this very special edition, the ENGIE Group. Thank you to our founding partners, Power Corporation of Canada, Groupe Bruxelles Lambert, the OECD. Thank you to some very important partners to us, RBC, Pernod Ricard, Invest Canada, Choose Paris. And ladies and gentlemen, thank you to all of the sponsors. Thank you to all of the speakers accepted this the invitation to join us. Without them, none of this would have been possible. So thank you very much. And thank you to all of you that have accepted to take some of your time of your busy schedule to join us. Thank you to Dorothée Pinault, who leads our operation in Paris. Thank you to Cédric Muller, our Vice President for all the program for the Conférence de Paris. Thank you to Bertrand Ambroise, the Vice President of our board. Thank you to the co-chair of our Board of Governors, Mr. Paul Desmarais and Jean-Pierre Clamadieu. It is truly a privilege and an honor to have these two individuals involved with the Conférence de Paris and being able to work with them. So thank you very much for your time and dedication. So my friends, on behalf of the entire family of the IEFA, to our office in Paris, our Canadian office, our office in Miami, on behalf of our founding chairman, Gilles Rémillard, on behalf of Monsieur Desmarais Junior, on behalf of Monsieur Jean-Pierre Clamadieu, thank you, welcome, and I truly hope that you will enjoy this very special edition. Use it, meet the people. We're here for you, and I truly hope that, and I have no doubt that I will see you in person next year in November in Paris for the 5th edition of the Conférence de Paris. And now, ladies and gentlemen, it's my great pleasure and my privilege to introduce you to a great friend of the Conférence de Paris and the International Economic Forum of the Americas, Ángel Gurría, Secretary General of the OECD. Ladies and gentlemen, be safe. Monsieur Gurría, it's all yours.
Cher Nicolas, chers amis, c'est un immense plaisir de participer à nouveau à la conférence de Paris. Nous aurions aimé pouvoir vous accueillir à l'OCDE comme le veut la tradition, mais la situation actuelle ne nous le permet malheureusement pas. L'OCDE est fière d'être un partenaire de cet événement important qui, chaque année, nous offre une opportunité unique de dialoguer au sujet des défis mondiaux et de trouver ensemble des solutions rassemblant les points de vue des gouvernements, secteur privé, société civile et des organisations internationales. The COVID-19 pandemic has unleashed an unprecedented health, economic, social crisis across the globe. The pandemic has claimed over 1.5 million lives and more than 50 million infections have been recorded so far. The impact of the economy on the economy has also been severe. Our September economic outlook projected global GDP to decline by 4.5%. That's a contraction of 4.5% this year, and a rebound in 2021. But you're talking many economies still below the level of 2019 by the end of next year. So a great loss. Now in the US and Japan, consumer spending remains around 4% below the pre-pandemic levels. And activity in hospitality sectors in some countries fell by 60, 80% in the first 3 months of the pandemic. And there are many sectors, like services, tourism in particular, that have been really very seriously affected. The social crisis is hitting hardest those at the bottom of the income distribution, those in precarious employment, workers in the top earnings quartile were 50% more likely to be working from home and therefore to be able to continue working than those in the bottom quartile, who were twice as likely to have stopped working altogether. So COVID-19 is also intensifying the weaknesses that we were confronting before the pandemic struck. Low economic growth, widening inequalities in income, in wealth, in opportunities, trade tensions, drop in investment, but most importantly, the breakdown of trust. The breakdown of trust. Now, we need to focus on an inclusive and sustainable recovery. Make sure that the benefits of such recovery are broadly shared. And this means working together with social partners, adapting skills, focusing on the youth, on what we could call youth responsive policies and services. And the recovery also has to be greener. Our single most important intergenerational responsibility remains the protection of the planet. Let's not forget that. Green sectors offer significant prospects for job creation, renewable energy, energy efficiency, nature-related activities. Now, as part of our response to the COVID-19 crisis, we at the OECD launched a digital hub on tackling the coronavirus. And this hub that we created provides a single entry point to OECD's analysis, the health, the economic, the social, the environmental, the governance impacts of COVID-19. It already has 160 policy briefs on all the fields of work of the OECD related to the COVID. So taxes and the COVID, and the health issues and the COVID, and the education and the COVID, and SMEs and the COVID, and the tourism and the COVID, regional development and COVID, etc. We also organized targeted, and this was at ministerial or even leaders level dialogues to support governments to tackle the crisis. Our recent ministerial council meeting, just on the 28th and 29th of October, the path to recovery, strong, resilient, green, and inclusive. That was the title. The path to recovery, strong, resilient, green, and inclusive. Confirmed ministers' strong support for such a recovery. We also had many leaders that participated. Governments cannot achieve these goals alone. Stronger cooperation among all stakeholders is key. Within, but also among countries. Social dialogue acted as a circuit breaker, enabling deals on short-time work to maintain employment in many countries. Whether they were called chômage partiel or Kurzarbeit or furlough, whatever, they allowed for this possibility to cushion the blow. Businesses agreed to refrain from dismissing workers. Trade unions accepted shorter working hours and lower monthly wages. And governments stepped in to compensate at least part of the wage losses. This solidarity must continue. Just like central banks must prolong their accommodative policies. And fiscal policies, that's the government, must remain flexible and focused on fighting the virus and its consequences first. I would say first and foremost. The OECD is working closely with firms, with governments, to ensure the implementation of our multinational enterprise guidelines and on the principles for responsible business conduct. Moreover, at the 2019 G7 summit, we launched the Business for Inclusive Growth platform. This partnership between the OECD and the global CEO-led coalition of 40 companies is committed to advance human rights, build inclusive workplaces, strengthen inclusion in value chains and business ecosystems. But of course, they are now focusing on fighting COVID-19 and its effects. Mesdames, Messieurs, cette année, plus que jamais, la conférence de Paris offre une occasion unique de tisser des liens plus étroits et de partager des solutions pour reconstruire un mieux. Soyez assurés que l'OCDE continuera de renforcer notre coopération multipartite. Ce n'est qu'en travaillant ensemble que nous pourrons espérer parvenir à une reprise forte, résiliente, verte et inclusive. Merci à tous.
Good morning, ladies and gentlemen, live from Paris. We're very pleased and honored to kick off this Paris Conference edition with you. Thanks, Mr. Gurría and Rémillard, for laying the ground for this forum and putting into perspective the main challenges ahead. We do have a very busy agenda for the roundtable that's about to start on forging a resilient and low-carbon economy. Let me quickly introduce the speaker that will take part to this roundtable and also remind you that you will be given the opportunity to ask questions, and timing permitted at the end of the session, we will try and pick a few of the questions you might have addressed. Speakers are with you now. Gwenaëlle Avice-Huet, you're the Executive Vice President of ENGIE. Lara, you're Chief Risk and Compliance Officer, and you also sit on the board of Credit Suisse. José Manuel Entrecanales, you're the Chairman and CEO of Acciona, and Philippe Mareine, Chief Digital and Transformation Officer, and also Head of CSR with Atos. Welcome to all of you to this discussion. We are going to start with you, José Manuel, if you're okay with that. We all know that making economies more robust and more resistant and resilient to shocks has been high on the agenda since the 2008 financial crisis. But as we are currently struggling with another crisis, the call for this resilience is even louder. We also know that the clock is ticking for the energy transition and for all of us to meet the COP21 goals. So, José Manuel, from your perspective, what is really changing the COVID context in terms of climate change ambitions?
This is a very important moment here. We're living in a historic moment, and it's a historic moment for a number of reasons. For the obvious reasons, I mean, how it's changing people's habits, behaviors, the terrible social impact of the pandemic, so on and so forth. But there's also, to me, a very relevant happening here. We've realized that our system, our economic system, is not actually working that well. And we've realized it not because of the pandemic, also because of that, but mostly because we have come to the conclusion that either we stop consuming and then and the environmental challenges that we are hugely suffering in the world start recovering. And if we do that, of course, the economy dies. So it's kind of a quid pro quo that we cannot afford. So we need to find a system by which our conventional capitalism, not to mention all the other elements of the difficulties of the negative consequences of our conventional capitalism, that we're now suffering, but all those elements need to be regenerated in some way. So we've gone from a feeling of responsibility in our business activity, in our environmental activity, to an attitude of resilience, to need to be resilient. Now we need to go on to a regeneration mode. So that's kind of the 3 R's that to me mark the key to the next phase. So from responsibility to resilience to regeneration. Resilience is not going to change things. It's going to improve how we resist, by all means, and we need to focus on it. But we need to change the system. We need to regenerate our own capitalism in order to continue to thrive and to continue to progress. So that's, I guess, would be my most important takeout from this present crisis.
As you were saying, this is a time for action now. Lara, to what extent are the governments and the private sector pressured to act now and to make action and take more than decision, but put them into place?
Thank you, Emmanuelle, and again, thank you for having me today. So I think it's a very relevant question, and there is definitely pressure, and I would say stress in the system to act. But let's be clear, governments already have stress. We heard that in the opening remarks, dealing with a range of what we call super trends at Credit Suisse, including climate change, anxious societies, infrastructure, millennials, as well as the income divide that we've heard about. So there's definitely existing pressure, and the private sector is playing a role. Now, COVID has, again, amplified those pressures. I think the benefit in terms of action is that actually the banks have had an opportunity to be part of the solution as we've gone through the COVID crisis, and I think that will continue to be the case. But we're also very watchful that the crisis does not move into the financial system, because clearly that would be the worst case outcome. And we heard in the opening remarks some of the tools that I think have to be made available to prevent that from happening. Now, let me shift, though, to COVID specifically and maybe more of the positive benefits that we're seeing that are driving people to act, not just pressure and stress. I think we would all agree that the COVID scenario has forced all of us to really think about individually how we have to change our behaviors for the betterment of the broader society. I think historically there's been a little bit of a tone around it's not my problem, it's someone else's problem, that they need to be the person that acts, it's not up to me. And I think COVID has clearly underscored that people's individual behaviors, governments' behaviors, do affect the broader society. And I think we've crossed that Rubicon during COVID, which I think is critical. I think the second thing is we've clearly all had an opportunity to reflect on what is important about our futures. COVID has definitely galvanized people's thinking about the future. And I think the need for sustainable systems, sustainable healthcare, sustainable government, sustainable infrastructure, and sustainable capabilities as it relates to climate. So those are the positive aspects. And the last thing I would say is I think COVID has clearly opened our eyes to the art of the possible and how quickly we can act. If you had told us all a year ago we would be executing this conference in the way that we are, that we would be working from home largely in most institutions around the world and really accomplishing that in very short order, we would have said that was impossible. So the impossible has actually become possible. And this is actually accelerating people's thinking, I think, also in terms of how we act and our capability to actually act and do things quite transformationally. The last point I would make, though, is that while there is huge pressure, urgency, excitement, enthusiasm to act, we have to have the fortitude and grit to be in this for the long term. This is not something that will change overnight. Many companies will have to be restarted. Industries have to be restarted. Infrastructure has to be rebuilt. And so some of the tools and capabilities I'm sure we'll talk about really need to be in place today to be able to see this transition through over the next 10, 20 years.
Thank you very much, Lara, for exchanging your views with us. We will come back in a few minutes with all of you to critical examples you've put into places into your own firm to meet all these challenges. But I would like to hear you, Gwenaëlle, if you can hear me properly, on this COVID crisis being a game changer. What has it changed really from your perspective?
Yes, thank you very much, Emmanuelle, for having me today. So maybe just a few elements to share regarding the sustainability aspect following the crisis. What we've experienced is that the crisis emphasized the need to transition even more rapidly to a low-carbon economy. And concretely, what happened during this pandemic is that numbers of activities were very much challenged, including renewables activities, including low-carbon investments. But at the end of the day, the renewable industry, the low-carbon industry experienced challenges, but it was very much in progress. Why is that? Because climate change remains the key target for us, for everybody. I mean, it is the key target that we have to fight against, climate change. And therefore, the pandemic strengthened our positioning, the positioning towards carbon neutrality. And therefore, just give one example. The renewable production for the first half year 2020 was higher than the previous year. There is a real huge urge for low carbon economy, and the huge investments in the renewable energy sector is happening today. And as of ENGIE, for example, what happened is that for the first half year 2020, we invested like 2 gigawatt renewables in the United States, just 2 gigawatt in a year. And there are plenty of customers, plenty of clients that are saying, I want to decarbonize, please help us. And even during the pandemic, we installed, for example, microgrid for customers in hospitals. So there is so much going on. And my takeaway is that the pandemic strengthened our resiliency and emphasized the even more needed transition to rebuild an economy that is fully sustainable. Why is that? We need to be closer to energy resources and to energy production. We need to build a new system that will be more resilient. And what we've learned is that there is a path to that. The current crisis has shown the way to build a more sustainable system tomorrow. That's what happened, and that is what we continue to do in the future. So to continue to deploy the right solutions to accompany territories, to accompany clients, to accompany industrial players in a sustainable transition for the future.
Again, Gwenaëlle, we will see with you in a few minutes what practically ENGIE does to accompany its clients on these challenges. But let's move on now more into tech digital side of things with you, Philippe. Since the beginning, we've talked a lot about the energy transition. Now it's time to address what the innovation, what the role as tech innovation in the big picture. We all know and we all experience that the current crisis has dramatically accelerated the digital trends, especially the way we work from home. But that's only one single example of these changes. But at the same time, there is a concern about the carbon footprint of the digital infrastructures and notably data centers. That's what really come up often in this discussion. Do you think we can reconcile these two forces, the need for digital, but this sort of pollution correlated with these infrastructures?
Yes, I do. And hello also from my side, and thank you, Emmanuelle. It's true that you're right. In this crisis, we see an extraordinary acceleration of digital. I would say not only communication and collaboration type of solutions, supporting flexible working, but we see also the fundamental change in the business processes of our customers. So how digital help, for instance, remote services or remote operations, We'll see also the explosion of simulation technologies. I think, for instance, about the vaccine for the COVID-19. So with high performance computing, with quantum computing now coming in. And also, I would say, for all kind of traceability technologies such as blockchain. So yes, definitely we see this acceleration of digital in the COVID-19 crisis. But when we look at the impact on the environment, on the CO2 emissions, I think digital technologies today are responsible for approximately 4% of the global carbon emissions, the CO2 emissions in the planet, which is obviously a lot, and we do a lot of things to optimize that, and this is a growing trend. But at the same time, all experts agree to say also that digital solutions have a potential to reduce the overall carbon emissions, to decarbonize by 15 to 20%. Through smart digital solutions, accelerating, for instance, energy efficiency, energy management, supporting smart business processes. So all these digital solutions, of course, have a great lever impact. So my take here is, of course, when it comes to building a strong, resilient, greener and inclusive recovery, digital is definitely a key driver to achieve that, and it's much more the solution than the problem today.
We will come back a little bit later on the opportunities offered by digital, but as I was saying, I would like now to get into the details with each and one of you of more concrete action. We've put that big picture forward for the audience. Let's now get into the examples, and I'm getting back to you, Lara. You said at the beginning of this discussion that governments and private companies, including financial institutions, need to rethink their role and adjust their action. I would like you to walk us through a program launched last year by Credit Suisse, Climate Risk Strategy Program. What are the main pillars? What are the objectives and the underlying examples of this strategic plan?
So the first thing is, I think it's important to understand this is, again, a multi-year transition for Credit Suisse. And so this strategy really carries us through our own transition. There are really three key pillars, which I think are critical. And I just want to say we are really seeing very strong interest from our corporate clients as well as our private wealth clients to engage in this transition, both for their companies as well as investments. And the pillars really center around that. So the first is what I'd call push, which is how we manage the risks that will result from climate change. Clearly, as the Chief Risk Officer, this is something that occupies a great deal of my time, but it also is an area where we are looking to travel along with our clients and develop client-specific strategies around how they can transition their companies, their industries through this very important transition globally. But at the same time, we've also introduced as a bank new exclusions, areas that we will no longer finance, because I think it's very important that while we encourage our clients to move, that we clearly are saying what are the parts of the spectrum we will no longer do. And I think this is going to be a continuation of Credit Suisse revisiting, again, how are we pushing the bottom end of industries toward transition and no longer supporting certain types of activities. For example, financing thermal coal extraction, coal power, and obviously projects in the Arctic. So I think it's a good start, but we will continue to evaluate areas where we will no longer participate. And we're obviously focused at the moment on our oil and gas industry. So that is what I'd call the push of Credit Suisse and helping our clients transition into the new world. The second pillar is really mobilizing capital to support clients, but also for investors to invest in companies. And this is where we will be mobilizing funds for the transition. We've announced, first of all, a new organization within Credit Suisse called the Sustainability Research and Investment Solutions Function. This reports directly into our CEO, run by the CEO, Lydie Hudson. And this is really a very focused organization who will be producing new products and capabilities that will allow companies, again, and investors to invest. We've committed to 300 billion of sustainable financing to be launched over the next 10 years. I'm sure we will hopefully look to meet or exceed that goal. But there are a number of other initiatives in that area of responsibility for the bank, including impact and responsible sustainable investing, renewable energy finance, green bonds and loans. And I'm absolutely convinced that if you look at the creativity of the financial sector, this is going to be an area that will continue to grow as the finance sector finds ways, again, to support investment in this transition, which will clearly, again, take a significant amount of funding. And then the last pillar is obviously Credit Suisse's own footprint. I'm happy to say, as a Swiss bank, Switzerland has been obviously at the forefront of climate sensitivity and ESG for a long time, but we are going to continue to increase our share of renewable energy within our operations and decrease our CO2 emissions. We've actually strengthened our commitment to environmental management objectives for the year, and we've agreed to reduce 75% our total greenhouse gas emission, increase in our energy efficiency, and obviously the reduction of single-use plastics. I do want to say that today, for Credit Suisse, our renewable energy consumption in Switzerland is 100%. We're currently at 90% globally at the end of 2019, and we will be at 100% globally by 2025. So how, again, do we actually walk the walk inside the bank? So those are the three key pillars. And again, this is critical for Credit Suisse to really address all aspects of its business, its clients, its own ability and willingness to lend and participate in transactions, as well as how we operate our bank around the world.
Thank you very much, Lara. I just have a quick question on what you said when you were talking about excluding some areas and not lending to sort of not clean energy. Do you would you take there would be a step-by-step approach, and do you have a sort of a deadline where you will stop totally to finance these activities? In a few words, please.
As you know, there's a number of activities, so I think we would have to be quite specific for me to answer that question. But the answer, in short, is yes. I think if transition is to succeed, then at some point there will become limited, if not zero, appetite to continue to participate with people who are not transitioning. And there's a variety of areas around the world where, in some cases, we've already made that decision. And I think over the coming years, we'll continue to identify areas where we're no longer comfortable, either working with certain companies who are not aware and moving themselves, and or in certain segments of the finance industry.
I'm going to move towards you, Philippe, now with a roadmap that has been laid out in June by Atos. Your commitment, if I'm not wrong, is to achieve net zero carbon emission by 2035. That is 15 years ahead of the Paris Agreement. So this is very ambitious. How do you intend to achieve that goal?
Yes, you are right, Emmanuelle. This is a very ambitious target, net zero 2035, that our CEO, Elie Girard, took towards the markets. And for us, it means, obviously, first of all, considerably expanding the scope of our decarbonization program. I would say not only for the carbon we have under our strict influence, our strict control, such as our data centers, the offices, the travel of our people, but also for the carbon, the CO2 emission that we have under our influence. And here, obviously, this is a full ecosystem with our clients and partners. And second, it means also for us accelerating the pace. I would say, because this means this net zero 2035 target that we would divide by 2. Our CO2 emissions. So again, not only the direct ones, but also the indirect ones until the end of this decade. And third, also it means that we would considerably expand the scope of our offsetting program to eliminate, to compensate all residual CO2 emissions, so that we reach indeed net zero until 2035. So what kind of tools have we put in place to achieve that? I would like to quote perhaps quickly 3 initiatives. So first of all, we decided to introduce an internal carbon pricing in our company, which plays a kind of correction roles to the P&L of our businesses, so to the financial results, and also has an impact on the variable pay of our managers. So for instance, if a manager decides to switch a data center to renewable energy or to move to green suppliers, he will get some credit, and this will have an impact on his financial results. So it's a very powerful mechanism. The second one, obviously, that we have introduced with our customers, and we expect also our suppliers to do the same, is what we call the decarbonization level agreement. So this is a little bit like the service level agreement in our contracts. So it is legally binding for us, for Atos, meaning that, for instance, when we have an infrastructure services contract with our customers, we commit to reducing, for instance, by 15 or 20% the CO2 emissions. And if we don't achieve that, we take the cost for offsetting the residual carbon emissions. So as you can see, we may have also some penalties associated to that, and this is legally binding for us. So second initiative. And the third one is, of course, that we believe and we invest a lot in research. We believe that new technologies have a fantastic role to play to drive a low carbon economy. And just to give an illustration, with one of our big partners, talking about offsetting or sequestrating carbon, we invest in to help these customers to develop, new materials that can absorb, that can capture the CO2 in the atmosphere, a little bit like the plants. And these kind of materials, of course, require very complex chemical reactions with molecules with more than 50 atoms, and which can only be simulated with quantum computing today, so quantum algorithm. And this is, I think, a nice research, obviously, to again to power a decarbonized economy.
It is a very fascinating scientific initiative that we will follow. Anyway, Gwenaëlle, you're back with us. Let's quickly move on to your side of things and the example of ENGIE having incorporated in its status a social and environmental purpose, that the Loi Pacte that gave this opportunity to corporate companies in France last year. Why did you do it, and what do you expect it will change with ENGIE and all its stakeholders, because this is really the issue at stake?
Yes, you're right. Well, ENGIE's purpose embodies our ambition to accelerate the transition towards a carbon neutral economy, and through both ways. First, to reduce energy consumption, and second, to develop more environmentally friendly solutions. That's the purpose that the board of ENGIE decided upon a few months ago. It was so important because it's a matter of pride for our employees, but it's also a purpose that makes sense for our clients, for our partners, for our shareholders. So it was so important to define a clear purpose that is leading our business model. And basically, it means that we want to reconcile energy performance with a positive impact for the planet and on the people. So there is really a conviction within ENGIE that we are making our business activities completely consistent with this transition towards a carbon neutrality economy. And therefore, what did we do concretely? First, we halved our greenhouse gas emissions over the last few years, putting a very strong emphasis on renewable deployments, but also on reduction of energy consumption. So just maybe one point around renewable energies. Where do we stand? Basically, today we have doubled our installed capacity on wind and solar by comparison to 2016. So we doubled in just 4 years. It's a global presence of 27.5 gigawatts of operating renewable capacity, and we are developing strongly. So that means that we can turn around the business, and this can be extremely significant. Now we're installing like 3 gigawatts a year, which is absolutely huge. And we have a target to reach 4 gigawatts in the medium term, and this ambition target will position ENGIE in a very decisive position on top renewable player in the world. So it means that when it comes to purpose, this translates immediately into concrete elements, into concrete activities, and one of them is renewable, and the second one is energy efficiency. What's the best energy? It's the one that you do not consume. Therefore, when we talk about decarbonization pathway, it means that we also have to reduce consumption on energy. And we are talking about buildings, we are talking about cities, industries, transports. There are plenty of areas where we can reduce consumption around energy. And that's what we propose also to our clients, decarbonization through reduction of energy consumption. For example, by developing heating and cooling networks or energy storage or cogeneration, numbers of different activities, microgrids. There are numbers of solutions, not one single solution, but numbers of different solutions. And with both areas, renewables and reduction of energy consumption, that's how we can decarbonize the economy. And that's how we wanted to turn into action our purpose.
Thank you very much, Gwenaëlle. So we think this is not only sort of philosophic conviction, but it really deepens into the roots of your strategy and your businesses at ENGIE. José Manuel, I'm coming back to you now to take a step further after all this concrete action, and I would like to hear you on the roles of stimulus packages and the way private companies should take advantage of this package that has been rolled out during the crisis to accelerate their energy transition. So I'm talking obviously about the Green Deal of the European Commission and also the project of the European taxonomy. What's your view on this?
Well, let's see. If we take as a fact that we need to invest a great deal of capital, an immense amount of capital in transforming the economy, if we also take for granted that in order to achieve SDGs, we need to invest, 70% of the SDGs are achieved through infrastructure. And if we also take for granted that we are living in a moment of transformation of the technology, the stimulus of the energy technology, but also in many other sides of the infrastructure environment, the reality is that we need to invest in a great deal of projects which are not yet proven to be technology capable. So, of course, there is a great part of the renewable energy world which is mainstream and is perfectly proven as a capable technology, which is what we've been doing for the past 25 years. Let me tell you, when we started this industry, in the wind energy industry, I remember we used to have to take the blades when they had cracks to the beach down in Tarifa in South Spain, because the windsurfers were the only ones who were capable of repairing the cracks. I mean, I'm just giving you, this was 1992. So just to give you an idea of how nascent that industry was. Now we're there, but there are parts of our industry that are as nascent as in an infantile situation. Say, for example, hydrogen, say floating PV, shared transport, electric cars, all these new parts of the economy that need to be put into the mainstream need a great deal of help, and that's what the public funds of next generation could be used for, and that I think is going to be the greatest value of them. If they start being used for financing mainstream renewable investment, frankly, I think we'll be replacing private capital, which is perfectly capable of doing that, and I don't think that would be the best use of it. So demonstration projects, prototypes, huge investment. I mean, as somebody was mentioning before, one of my colleagues was mentioning before, the research, primary research, is not that expensive compared to when you go to prototype to the top prototype investment. It's about 1 to 10. That's the general rule of thumb. So we need that capital to make that transition fast and to make it efficient. From the point of view of a reference, I think taxonomy is a key tool, and the fact that we have it allows us in Europe and eventually in the rest of the world, I think, is going to be taken as an example for the model that needs to be followed for that sustainable investment. So basically, my takeout would be, I mean, the money's here, the capital is available, the social demand is there, the political will is there, and most of all, the need is absolutely there. So I think it's a great business opportunity, apart from a great challenge. But when there's a big challenge, there's a big business opportunity. Rule of thumb.
Thank you very much, José Manuel, for introducing that message and for giving us the opportunity to reflect on what you said, and that's why I'm turning now to Lara. José Manuel just said the money is here, the social demand is here, so every condition seems to be around to make it happen. So what is the problem right now? What leverage do you need to take further action and really put the thing into motion, as José Manuel was perfectly explaining it here?
So it's a very good question, and I would say a few things. I mean, first of all, we do have green shoots, and obviously the EU Green Deal is a great example alongside the EU taxonomy for creating the environment where companies can start to access capital alongside the financial industry to transform. But I would just generally say that the scale of what has to happen to transform major companies and major infrastructure is significant. So I think we're at the early stages, but investors want to know there's a return. Investors want to know that previously incumbent business models, which in many cases are very high returning business models with very strong profits, are actually going to survive through the transition. And what is the support mechanism to take those companies from where they are to where they need to go? And obviously there's some great examples today of companies that are making that transition today, but it's not from a profit perspective per se an easy decision to make. And obviously, given the technology conversation we just had, it's an uncertain time. But just to get quite specific, so one is we need comparable data. There is a flurry of information out there today on what constitutes sustainability metrics. I think there's been some good initiatives, obviously the revision of the EU non-financial reporting directive, trying to address this, but we need some global clarity on what data we will all be relying on to demonstrate that an investment is in fact a sustainable investment or is moving a company along the transition path. And again, the balance we have to strike is it has to be globally recognizable, but industry specific. So data is critical. The second is definition. Again, the EU taxonomy is moving us in the right direction, but we need global language to describe what is, again, a green activity and or what qualifies a company to move along a transition pathway. We've put out some research where we've defined what we believe in a white paper form are credible transition pathways, but this is something that has to be increasingly recognized so that investors can put their money down and have some certainty that these companies are investing in their future in a way that can be, again, also compared. And the last thing is obviously incentives, as we've touched on. Obviously, clarity around the carbon tax is going to be very important. This is what I'd call the pull, which again is what is the economic incentive to move companies forward. But I also think there will be a push, which is that financing businesses, borrowing money in businesses that are not moving and investing in green will increasingly become expensive, much more expensive. So I think you're going to have the financial markets working with this transition to make those that are not green a much more expensive business model. But we are clearly at this point where we're navigating that transformation. So those are the three big areas that we really need to get clarity on, not only in the EU, but globally, ideally, for capital to flow and companies to actually make that transformation.
Thank you very much, Lara. José Manuel, can you maybe walk us through and give us some feedback? I think you had a sort of a case study on what EU taxonomy would imply in Acciona businesses. How would you classify your activities? And I think it could be maybe interesting for you to give us a bit of example of that based on Lara was saying about comparable data, needs for metrics, definition of what is a green activity. How are your investors reacting to all this? Can you hear me, José Manuel?
Yes, I can hear you. Well, in Acciona, we decided to take the taxonomy effort as a challenge to our own business, and we started analyzing all of our activities within the taxonomy structure. We came to the conclusion, and I think this is probably one of the first companies that has done it in Europe, that 93% of our capex was taxonomy compliant, and 85%, 83 or 85% of our EBITDA was taxonomy compliant. Now, obviously, for us, that is an essential tool, and we believe that it will become a tool that will be necessary for anyone who wants to claim environmental resilience and anyone who wants to be in the list of investable cases. I like the concept of pull and push explained by Lara. It's put in a simpler way. It's sticks and carrots, where you actually, and I think the key element of sticks and carrots is going to be carbon pricing, which is going to serve as the main pull, and whoever is not compliant with the authorized levels will have to adapt. Now, for us, examples on what we're doing. Well, for example, now we're very strongly getting into urban shared transport. We're one of the largest electric motorbike sharing company in the world, which is not to say a lot because there's not that much going on that front, particularly under the pandemic. But it is a great opportunity that I believe will become so after in not very long after the pandemic. We're in all sorts of demonstrative projects in the energy side, in the hydrogen side. We're now building a hydrogen plant in Mallorca, which is going to feed urban transport there, and we're very strong into floating PV. So all sorts of new opportunities. As I was saying before, for us, this regeneration is a huge business opportunity, possibly the biggest business opportunity the economy has experienced in many years. And frankly, I think this is the case for every company.
Thank you very much, José Manuel, for bouncing back on that. Gwenaëlle, would you like to react from what has been said either by Lara, on José Manuel, on taxonomy or ESG side of things, before we move to the last subject of the roundtable, because the clock is ticking?
Yeah, I will be short, but just maybe to wrap it up, I think that all the business is very supportive of the overarching principles of the Green Deal, carbon neutrality, and at the same time to make sure that no one is left aside and preserve welfare, employment in the EU, so everything together in order to develop a European industry policy that is very much proactive in terms of carbon neutrality. So everything is there. Carbon neutrality target by 2050 is highly important. And the 55 greenhouse emission reduction target announced by the European Commission is extremely ambitious. Now, when we look at the taxonomy, there are plenty of things that are extremely important for the future. It's paving the way for future investments. There are a few points of attention. For example, not putting aside gas in the transition. We know that a restrictive approach in the taxonomy, especially in the thresholds that have been discussed, could exclude investments in gas. And we know that gas will be necessary in the transition to transit from coal to gas. That will reduce significantly the greenhouse emissions. So it's really important not to left aside gas development, gas investment, because we need that on the short term and the middle term. And now what is important on the long term for gas is greening gas. And we do not talk about this transition enough. Green gas will be absolutely necessary. For example, biomethane investments, green hydrogen investments, all that will have to happen. And taxonomy can enhance those developments from gas to green gas. And basically that's all over the place, and that's why we have to put in place all the support schemes to enable this transition to happen. But all in all, it's extremely positive, and the 55% again greenhouse gas emissions target is absolutely important, and it will necessitate numbers of investments at the same time on renewables activity, power electricity system, but at the same time on green gas activities.
Thank you very much, Gwenaëlle. I'm going to turn to you now, Philippe, so we can move on to, again, the technology and digital side of things. All of you, Lara, José, Manuel, and Gwenaëlle, you've pinpointed all along your sharing views with us the importance of innovation, research, and technology. So I'm going to hand the mic now to Philippe on that one. At the beginning of the conversation, you said that the digital world was only responsible for 4% of the gas emission globally, Philippe. Do we expect this proportion, this number, to really explode in the next decade or even in the next few years? Isn't that a threat?
Exploding, I would not think. Of course, we can expect some increase of this proportion. Some experts foresee, for instance, that this percentage of 4% will come up to 8% until the end of the decade. But as you said, and as I think all panelists also said, we see at the same time innovation accelerating everywhere. So we know, for instance, that cloud, other edge computing technologies are much more energy efficient and therefore decarbonized compared to traditional IT type of infrastructure. And for instance, as far as we are concerned, Atos, we also invest in hydrogen. And we believe that in the near future, we would be able to power a supercomputer with hydrogen, with green hydrogen, I mean, so completely carbon neutral, zero carbon. And in addition to that, as already said, we feel the demand from our customers for decarbonization solutions. And we have already a lot of things that we can do to decarbonize business processes, for instance, to increase the efficiency of the production line, to optimize fleet management, or to optimize recycling processes thanks to smart data. So yes, of course, digital requires energy consumption, but at the same time, I feel innovation has a much greater impact and a lot of business opportunities also, as it was already mentioned.
Thank you very much, Philippe. So as I was saying, we're moving toward the end of the debate, and there's one subject we haven't raised so far. It is the shift or the potential shift between developed economies and developing economies. So my question being, how do we all tackle this issue of low carbon economy and resistance to shock, whether we are in a developed or in a developing economy. So there's a big difference and big shift here. And I keep the mic before leaving the floor to you. I'm putting into the loop a question that has been asked by the audience regarding this subject, which is, should we envision a reform of legal frameworks in emerging countries in order to launch an effective transition? What is the engagement of developed countries towards transition in emerging economies? Sorry for I've been a little bit long, but then I can give you the floor now so you can reply to this side of the debate we haven't explored yet. Who wants to take it? Lara.
So obviously this is a very important topic for the financial industry, and for our firm, we have a sizable developing markets business. I think there's a few comments I would make. One is, do we need to revise the legal framework? We are very much in support of certainly increasing the transparency around what is financed and how a variety of activity is done in the emerging markets. I think that is one of the only ways we can continue to ensure that there is trust and free flow of capital into the developing world, because it's clear that climate will affect the developing world more than the developed world. They are in the process of building up their economies. And so we really do need to make sure that the Western world and the developed world is actively engaging in investment there, but with the benefit of transparency around how things are financed. That's point one. Point two is there is a really strong existing infrastructure around the development banks, the World Bank, who are today helping these countries build infrastructure. The question is, how can we quickly shift from building what I would say is 20-year-ago infrastructure to more modern and renewable infrastructure? I think there's a huge opportunity with some cooperation and collaboration globally to start to shift that motivation. The third thing I would say is we have to look at balance of trade. Some of these countries depend heavily on fossil fuels. Many of them actually have rich reserves in renewable energy, hydro, solar, etc. So we need to really be thinking about them as exporters as well as importers, and how do we ensure that those opportunities for those countries are something that they have the capacity to embrace, again, as they go through this transition. So I think the tools are there. I definitely think some of the frameworks need to be revisited. Transparency is critical. And it's a perfect time because, again, these countries are actively investing today. So we need to have a sense of urgency in my mind around the developing countries, perhaps even first and foremost relative to developed.
Thank you, Lara. Gwenaëlle or José Manuel, would you like to take that question, but really with a short answer because we have only a few minutes left?
The question here, and in my opinion, the most difficult challenge we're facing in the developing economies is, in order to deploy the capital requirements that this transformation requires, legal stability needs to be put in place. Without legal stability, without legal predictability, which is often a difficulty in developing economies, it's very difficult that funds are going to be deployed in the scale that are needed. So if I were to put my finger on one of the biggest challenges that we have, institutional, international, global governance bodies need to, or international pressure by that matter, and from every side, needs to be put in place for capital, for governance, and for legal stability in order for those funds to be deployed. Without that, it's going to be difficult, despite the great efforts that the World Bank and other institutions are doing in that front. But private capital needs to go in.
Thank you, José Manuel. Gwenaëlle, we're back with you.
Yes, just maybe a few points additional. So first, we need, I think, to continue to raise awareness on local people about climate change and its consequences, especially on public health. Second, I think that we need an international approach on climate changes. because we need a carbon market, compensation, taxes linked with CO2 or something. So this is really important to tackle it at international level, and also because solidarity is a key element towards less advanced countries, such as it planned in the Paris Agreement. And lastly, we know that renewable is an opportunity to increase security of supply, resiliency, and there are numbers of developing countries that have set some important renewable development, for example, in Morocco, for example, in Costa Rica, in many number of countries. And I think that it is also up to the private sector to help those countries. For example, in ENGIE, we committed to promote access to sustainable energy for all by setting up a fund, ENGIE Ressembleur d'énergie. And the objective is really to enforce and to be able to support social entrepreneurs, smart, locally developed proposals, so that we can enforce solutions from solar home systems, from solar biomass hybrid 24/7 microgrid and things like that, so that we can support developing countries. So there are numbers of things happening, and it's up to international climate negotiations, but at the same time, the mobilization of the private sector.
Thank you very much, Gwenaëlle. Philippe, what's your view on the shift between developed and developing economies, given that you have Atos a global reach in numerous countries across the globe?
What I see is really from an opportunity perspective, I would say the big shift with the new generations now coming. You're right, in Atos we are in 72 countries. We recruit basically 20,000 young graduates per year, and a lot of them coming from India, coming from Africa, coming from Eastern Europe, all places over the world. And I see now how these young graduates contribute with new ideas to decarbonize. So I see also the energy coming from this new generation, and I think it's a fantastic sign for the future.
Thank you very much, Philippe. Maybe a very last question I would like to ask you before we close it. We have really a few seconds left, so we're going to make it short. José Manuel opened the discussion calling for a regenerational mode and a change in the capitalism system. What would be, in a few seconds, your call for changing the way capitalism has worked so far? You take the question if you want. If you don't want, you don't take it. But please be short, because again, in a few seconds, we will be cut off. José Manuel, since you launched the subject at the beginning of the round table, let's start for the last part. What is your call for a new capitalism?
My call for new capitalism, if I had to, there are so many parts of, so many elements involved in the regeneration effort. But if I had to choose one, and it's a good question, because it's one that I hadn't really thought about. But if I had to choose one, I would say business opportunity. Okay. If everyone who realizes that there is a huge business opportunity will get onto it.
Great. Lara, your call.
I think we have to go from investor primacy to a balance with social primacy, which means we have to actually define and quantify the value to society in our investment decisions.
Thank you. Gwenaëlle, would you like to take that one?
I would say that we need to refocus the investments globally to reconcile economic performance with a positive impact on planet and on people.
Great. Philippe, would you like to be the last one speaking on that one?
And I think following what Gwenaëlle said, invest and trust new technologies and innovation to decarbonize our planet.
Thank you very much to all of you for exchanging your view in a very dynamic and interactive way. Sorry for the beginning of the conversation that might have been a little bit rocky, but that's what virtual conferences are about. Thank you again to the audience for asking questions and also engaging with the panelists. See you hopefully next year. Take care, and thanks again for your time and your dedication to the conference. Thank you very much.